All right, welcome everyone to the April 2025 program meeting for the East Central Ohio Technology User Club. Do you ever wonder why some text just looks better than others? Whether you're designing a simple card, a professional logo, or anything in between, the choices you make with text, your typography, have a significant impact. Today, we're going to learn how to make those choices effectively. Our speaker will provide practical tips to help us select the right typefaces, arrange text for maximum appeal and readability, and sidestep common design mistakes. This session is designed for everyone, from beginners to experienced designers, aiming to deepen our understanding of typography. Leading this session is Chris Taylor. He has dedicated decades to technology and community education. His background includes over 36 years with the Canadian federal government in IT leadership roles, such as president of the Ottawa PC User Group, and an incredible track record of over 540 presentations. He's a 15-time Microsoft MVP recipient and has been honored with both the Ottawa Mayor's City Builder Award and a Ontario Volunteer Service Award for his dedication. Get ready to improve your design skills. Please welcome Chris Taylor.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, we'll go ahead and get her started. So, try again. There we go. Okay, so today's presentation is Fun with Fonts, and it is really about the art and science of typography, and it really is a blend of the two. On the screen, you have my email address as well as a link at the bottom where you can pick up the slides that I'm going to be presenting today, as well as there's a whole bunch of slides in the PDF file that I don't have time to cover today. And so I highly recommend that you download that just so you get that extra material. And in actual fact, I can also paste that if I can find my controls, chat, and I'm going to paste into the chat both my email address as well as the link to the slides. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So I think that this is an interesting way to start it off because it really will highlight how fonts can make a difference. So if you look at that for a couple of seconds, you think about what sort of emotion that evokes in you. And then you think of the same words, but in a different font. And considerable different feeling is evoked by that. Now, this is a rather extreme example, but all of your choices that you make when you're choosing fonts will make a difference in how people receive your message. So from a purist note, I think that everything that I'm going to be presenting today should be of interest to anybody who wants their text to be read by other people. However, there is some fascinating stuff that is marked with a green splat, which is fascinating stuff, I think. But if you don't understand or don't care, it really is just purists who care about that. Some style notes: any text that you see on the slides in blue will be an example of a specific typeface. And generally speaking, the name of the typeface will be underneath it in parentheses. So this is an example of the words old style serif in the Garamond typeface. I use hand gloves as sample text throughout the presentation, and typographers use this because it highlights a lot of the characteristics of any given typeface. And so here we see below that, we see the word hand gloves in the Univers typeface. In some of the big blocks of text where I don't want you to really read the text itself, you just want to get the flavor of how it looks to you. And so I use the lorem ipsum text. And if you want to use this random sort of looking text, you can get it in Microsoft Word by typing in equals lorem, open and close parentheses, and press enter. And LibreOffice Writer has it under the Tools Auto Text Standard menu. And you can get these blocks of text, which can be useful when you're just trying to display a whole bunch of text. Most of the typefaces used are in Windows 10 and 11. There are a few I'm going to use that were not in Windows 10 or 11, and that's when I couldn't find a font within Windows that exhibited a particular thing that I was trying to illustrate. The base typeface for the presentation is Book Antiqua, and Fun with Fonts on the opening slide is in Kamigata, and that's available for free at dafont.com. It's one of the more elegant of the typewritten or the handwriting typefaces around there. I really quite like it. So typography as defined by Merriam-Webster is the style, arrangement, or appearance of typeset matter. And I didn't think that that was really complete enough. And I found a better definition at Wikipedia: the art and technique of arranging type to make the written language legible, readable, and appealing. And I think that's really important for it to be legible, readable, and appealing. Typomania has been defined as an obsession with typography. And Eric Spiekerman says that typomania is a sickness that's incurable but not lethal. So if you come away from the presentation today with inflicted with it, don't blame me, or blame me, but don't complain to me. So Matthew Carter, who's designed a lot of typefaces, including a lot of the ones for Microsoft, he says type is a beautiful group of letters, not a group of beautiful letters. It's when you assemble your letters into a word, a sentence, paragraph, or a page that it becomes type. It's not in the individual characters, it's in the collection of them. Why should you care about typography? It's all about clarity, and clarity makes it easier for people to read your text information. And that's got to be the aim all the time, is that you want people to actually read it. So you want it to be clear. So where does clarity come from? Clarity comes from legibility, how easily you can distinguish one letter from another letter, and readability is how easily you can read words, sentences, or blocks of text. Other reasons why you might want to pay attention to typography: if you want to capture attention, Cooper Black is a very much in-your-face type thing, or convey an emotion, something like Edwardian script ITC. So let's define, going down from the basics right up to what is a font. So typeface, it's the glyphs, those individual letters, numbers, punctuation, and so forth, that share a common design. So we see 4 examples of typefaces here: Barlow, Goody Old Style, Skeena, and Bell MT. Now, you might actually be forgiven if right now you look at Barlow and Skeena and you say, oh, they're pretty much the same. Or you look at Goody Old Style and Bell MT and you think, well, they're the same. We'll see how these really differ in minor sort of things, but they add up to an overall effect. A typeface family is when you have a particular typeface and you have different styles. And the 3 different styles that you'll have is weight, slant, and width. And if you have one typeface family where it's not defined, it'll be what is in parentheses in there. So the weight would be irregular, slant will be Roman, and width will be regular. So the names that you see there, light, thin, medium, heavy, black, and so forth, they are not always available in all typefaces, and they're used a little bit intermixed. So, what one type designer will call heavy, another might call black, and so forth. So they're not exact terms, but they are just sort of a stratum. So at the bottom, we see 3 examples of a typeface family. So Barlow condensed light, where we actually defined the width as being condensed and light as being the weight. And we have Barlow semi-condensed, extra bold, italic. So that will define a particular typeface family. Then when you get down to a font. So a font is when you have the glyphs from one typeface using one style at one size. So things like Franklin Gothic Heavy 36 point is a specific font. Bodoni MT Condensed Bold Italic 48 point is a font. Now that's for the pedantic. For the non-pedantic, typeface is a font, typeface at a given style is a font, typeface in one style at a specific size is a font. They're all termed fonts by most people. So Gabriola is considered to be a font. Garamond Italic is a font. Franklin Gothic Medium Condensed Italic 32 point is a font. So don't get too hung up on, somebody saying, use Arial, and they say, well, that's not a font. You haven't defined the size and so forth. Don't worry about things like that. Then let's look at typeface categories. So you have serif, and they have those little horizontal extensions onto the ends of certain glyphs in the typeface. You have sans serif, where you just don't have those horizontal extensions. You have slab serif, which is like a sans serif font, but it's, or sorry, like a serif font, but the width of the actual strokes are even throughout the glyphs. You have script or handwriting. You have display and decorative, which are both, I group them up together because they tend to be used for large signage and things like that. They're very, very much bold and distinctive. You have monospace, where every glyph is the same width, and they have symbol typefaces, which is all those weird characters like you get in Wingdings. Let's look at the difference between serif and sans serif. This is probably the most general categorization of different typefaces. So serifs, they may make it easier to read, especially if you have smaller fonts and long lines, because those horizontal extensions onto some of the letters will help guide the eye as it goes across the page. Now, this is becoming, I think, a little bit less dramatic or important in fonts. We're getting much more used to reading, even in small fonts, sans serif fonts, but it still is thought to be a little bit easier to read in long lines and small typefaces. Sans serif, they stand out starker. They're usually in larger text, shorter text. Oh, and by the way, that there is not a serif on there. That is actually called an ear, and it is only on lowercase g's in certain typefaces. If we look at breaking down the glyphs, so the serifs are what you see in red, those little horizontal lines. Ascenders are parts of lowercase letters that rise above a lowercase x. Descenders are parts of glyphs that descend below the baseline. Counters are the open space within characters. And then if you have counters that have an opening to the outside, the aperture is that size or the distance where the opening is. The baseline is where the glyphs rest upon. The x height is the height above the baseline of a lowercase x. A cap height is the height above the baseline of capital letters. And you have ascender heights, which it's lowercase letters, how high they extend above the baseline, and they can extend above the cap height. You have a descender height, which is some of the glyphs go below the baseline. And you have leading, which is a space between multiple baselines. So if we look at the anatomy of type as X height, this is actually a very important readability issue in typefaces. And so we have here from a very low X height, Goody Old Style, up to Antonio, which is not a Windows font or available in Windows. I chose that from another Foundry, and I wanted one that had a particularly large X height, and Antonio has particularly large height at about 0.85 of the X, or the X is 0.85 of the cap height. So if we look at the two of them, you can see there's fair different flavor or feeling to those two extremes of Goody Old Style over to Antonio. Many normal typefaces that you'll find, they'll have an X height close to about 0.7. So the lowercase x is about 0.7 of the height of the cap height. So how do you choose that, or what effect will it actually have? A small X height. With smaller fonts and lowercase letters, you get a more cramped feeling in the lowercase area because they are smaller. But you get a more airy feeling overall because you have more space above the lowercase letters up to the cap height. If you have a large X height on small fonts, you have the space within the letters gets more legible because you actually have more space there for them. However, as the ascenders get smaller, it can cause readability issues. If you're going to mix typefaces on a single document or single page, a similar X height can create a sense of harmony in your text. Okay, so ascenders and readability, we get an awful lot of information from the ascenders in characters. So I'm going to display something here and take a quick look and see if you can, or how easily you can read the following line of text when you only see half of it. Okay, now sorry?
Distinguish these words.
Yep, but was it easier to actually read this instead?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. We get an awful lot of information from the ascenders. So, and this is where the X height, if you have really large X height, you lose that extra space in that room above the lowercase letters going into the ascenders, and it becomes less readable. So having a smaller X height can actually help with that readability. Counters, those spaces within the letters, closed counters can be really, really difficult to read. So Onyx is an example of a typeface with very closed counters, and it gives a very compact appearance. This is a great font to use if you want this boilerplate text at the bottom of a page with all the disclaimers. And you don't want people to read it, put it in with closed counters, and they'll very quickly tire of reading it. On the other hand, something like Corbel has very open counters, and they tend to be more readable and more legible, even at very small sizes. Strokes are the widths of those, the actual ink that is laid down. So strokes can be stressed where certain parts of the glyph are wider than other parts. You can see that in particular in something like the H, where you see that the vertical is about twice or even more the width of the stroke when it's on the horizontal. You can also have a directional slant, something like on the O, and you can have glyphs where it's a very gentle change from one width to another, such as the lowercase d in Goody Old Style. So stressed typefaces are made to look like calligraphic style of writing. On the other hand, you can have unstressed typefaces. Okay, and that you'll have every part of the glyph will be either exactly the same width or very similar. Okay, so very close to being the same. You can have small differences on it and it's still considered to be unstressed, but by and large, it's throughout the glyph, the width of the stroke is about the same. So they can be a lot easier to read, especially at all sizes from huge down to really small point sizes. And they're really used when legibility outweighs character. So when you have stressing on your strokes, it really adds character to it. And in certain circumstances, you're not going to want character. You want legibility above all else. We'll see some examples of that very shortly. The slant, you can have italics, and italics, for it to be italic rather than just slanted, it has to have different characteristics from the Roman version. So we see here, lowercase a as being a single story letter, and the lowercase on the upright is a two-story. The F is considerably different shape to it. The K in the italic version, it has a loop around, and it doesn't have that loop around. So different characteristics than the uprights. You can also have obliques, which basically just look like they've been shoved over sideways. They share the same characteristics as the Roman version. Now, when you're actually talking about a given typeface and you're picking up Arial, or say Arial and Arial italic, it's called italic even though it's really an oblique. They don't have a true italic, but they still refer to it that way. Numbers can be very important in writing in that there are a number of ways that they can be displayed. So you have lining figures where all of the numbers are the same height, and they're really good in tables of numbers. You have old style figures where you have ascenders on the 6 and 8 and descenders on the 3, 4, 5, 7, and 9. And they're very nice in running text. Here's an example in Candera. You can also have lining figures where this is an example of lining figures and the old style figures. So you have here a running text, and in the top one you have lining figures where all the numbers are the same height, and in the bottom one you have old style figures where you have ascenders and descenders. And I think you can see how they're a little bit more elegant in running text to actually have old style figures. On the other hand, in tables of numbers, lining figures tend to be more readable and more natural. They look nicer. So you can see that the old style figures in a table of numbers doesn't look as good. You can also have spacing differences. So you can have tabular, where you have uniform width for all of them. So it's like you're writing in Courier or something like that. Gill Sans MT is an example there. Or you can have proportional, where they're different widths depending on the width of the numbers. And again, you have a difference in whether you're running text, where proportional actually looks better, versus tables of numbers, where it's better to have tabular. And the way you really see that is if you look just at a glance at it, this number here looks like it's smaller than this number or this number just because it's shorter on the line, even though it's a larger number. Over here, you're not tricked into thinking that the 9 million is actually smaller than the 3 million number. In OpenType, you can actually have support for tabular or proportional and linear or old style. So if you go into the font dialog box in Microsoft Word and you go to the Advanced tab, you'll have possibly, depending on the font and the designer, the ability to change the number spacing between proportional and tabular, and possibly the number form between old style and lining. Calibri is an example of font where you can actually choose it. So when you're using it in tables of figures, you can actually go in and choose tabular lining. And if you're in running text, you can have it actually display it in proportional old style, which will look better there. The default for Calibri, by the way, is tabular lining. So if you don't go in and change it, that's where you'll end up even if you do a table of numbers. Talking about OpenType, TrueType was actually developed by Apple and Microsoft in the early 80s. OpenType was developed by Adobe and Microsoft in the late 90s. OpenType supports a lot of more advanced typesetting features, things like small caps and stylistic sets, true fractions, ligatures, things like that. Designers always would want to use OpenType. You and me, why not OpenType? If I have the choice and I'm downloading a font, and I can download either an OpenType or a TrueType font, I'll always choose the OpenType. Anatomy of type, font size. Okay, so a lot of people probably realize or know previously that there's 72 points to the inch. Well, not really, or not necessarily. The 72 points, when they're talking about points, they're talking about the height of the old lead molds that they actually used to do typesetting. It's not the height of the glyph. The height of the overall lead mold is always a few points bigger than the distance between the ascenders and the descenders, and that's to avoid collisions when you have multiple lines of text. Unfortunately, or fortunately for the designer, they're free to define that however they choose to. Here we have 4 examples of typefaces: Perpetua, Franklin Gothic Book, Arial, and Placard. And I drew a line across the cap height. And you can see they're actually all different heights. But they were all set to 96 points. From this website, a quote: "There's no universally valid basis for body height usage, and the font size is ultimately delivers." This came as a big surprise to me when I first started delving into type, that the height of characters was not universally according to the number of points. Here's some other extreme examples: Santa Catalina and Getcho, and both of those are set at 96 points, but they are considerably different in height. Another thing you have to really watch out for, especially when you get into handwriting or script fonts, is that you can end up with crashing between lines of text if you're not careful. Santa Catalina has crashing descenders. That lowercase g will descend down into the next line of text unless you take account for that. And as a result, you're best to set them off as single lines so that you can avoid problems of crashing lines. Those 2 fonts are available for free at dafont.com if you're interested in them. Character widths. is another thing that can be different between different typefaces. And so one of the things that I like to point out here, which I found kind of interesting, is they're all set at the same point size. And if you look at the length of the line of Callisto, the lowercase is shorter than the lowercase for Georgia. But in Callisto in uppercase, the entire alphabet, it's actually wider than the uppercase for Georgia. So that was kind of curious. And you'll see different characteristics, flavors of the different fonts come through. Qs are often quite elegant. I think Callisto and Book Antiqua have very, very elegant Qs. You can see different shapes of the C. You have a very much wider, more open C in Book Antiqua, various things like that. As you start delving into different typefaces, you start picking up these differences. You see, we have a descender on a capital J in Book Antiqua. It's pretty rare to have descenders on that other than things like the letter Q often has a descender, but usually J's, capital J's, they don't have descenders, but Book Antiqua does. Leading is the line spacing. And so you can increase the leading to help readability, especially if you have long lines and very compact typefaces. And it can help if you have large X heights as well. You might be sort of forgiven if you look at the first block of text and you see where I finished off one line with two words in red, and I go over and I pick up in red on the next line. But if you look, you'll see that I actually skipped a line between the two words that ended on the right-hand side and the two words in red that started on the left-hand side. It's a little bit easier to pick out that actually happened when you look at the increased leading on the lower example. It shows how you can help get the person's eye back to the left-hand side for compact text and so forth, compact typefaces, if you increase the leading. Tracking adjusts the space between all the letters when you have justified text. And you can see how in certain typefaces, you can end up with these huge gaps that really look ugly. If you do tracking on it, you can adjust the space between all of the letters so you don't end up with those massive gaps. Kerning is when you have overlapping of letters. So it adjusts the space in between certain letter pairs so that you end up with optically similar amounts of space between the two letters. So here we see Arial, and in these examples I show the start or the end of the first letter is with the green line, and the red line shows the start of the second letter. And you can see how with the T and the O, the second letter actually starts before the end of the first letter. And in the case of A and V, they're just close together, and they overlap as well. So that's Arial. Let's look at Roboto. So this is an interesting one because the N and them look about the same. The T and the O, they don't actually overlap. So the first letter ends and the second letter doesn't start until after the first letter. And even with A and V, they don't overlap. This is the first example, and we're going to get into more interesting differences between different typefaces and things like that right about now, now that we've gone through all of the basics. But Roboto is the first example I'm giving of a typeface that was designed with a very specific purpose in mind. It was designed by Google for use in Android on phones. What is a characteristic of phones? Very small screens, very small typefaces. If they kerned those aggressively, it would make it really, really hard to read. And so they do kern it in that the letters can get closer together if they are certain letter pairs, but they never overlap, because if they kerned it aggressively, it would make the text really hard to read when it's really small typefaces. So when you're choosing a typeface, if you can get a hold of the original design intent or what the criteria was when the designer was building that typeface, that might help you choose whether it's appropriate for your particular use or not. Think about clarity, legibility, and readability. You want to make sure that people can read your text. Otherwise, there's no point in writing it. Think about the effect or the emotion of a particular typeface. You know, is it the use bold, casual, formal, fun. Something that you design for a business report is going to be different than the typefaces you're going to play with for a poster on, a kid's carnival or something like that. Think about the intended use. If you are using different typefaces for headings and bodies in your text, don't make them too similar. That can make it very confusing as to what's a heading and what's body text. And don't mix too many faces together. One or two typefaces on any one page is usually best. Okay, now we get into how certain typefaces were designed and why. Times New Roman was designed for the Times of London newspaper in the 1931 by the Monotype Corporation. At the time that it was designed, the Times of London printed their newspaper on better paper than other newspapers of the day. What that allowed them to do was use very sharp serifs, stressed letter forms, and so forth, so they had something that looked more elegant than the competition. It's horizontally very compact because they had columns, narrow columns, and so they could get away with it being very compact because the eye doesn't have to travel a great distance to get from the end of one line to the start of the next one. So it's very suited to narrow columns. It is one of the most overused typefaces in the world. The reason for that is that it used to be the default typeface in Microsoft Word. And so anybody who didn't know about typefaces and just started a new document, they were using Times New Roman. Matthew Butterick, who's a type designer, said Times New Roman is not so much a font choice as an absence of font choice. So those people who just didn't know better opened up Word, started typing, and they were using Times New Roman. Frutiger was designed for the Charles de Gaulle Airport in 1970. The design criteria for it was considerably different than Times New Roman. They wanted legibility at various angles, sizes, and distances. They wanted to have it that you could look down a concourse at the airport, something that was 300 meters away, and you'd be able to make out the signage. Ascenders and descenders very prominent to help people to read it. Wide apertures, making it easy to distinguish between different letters. The designer said what was important was total clarity. I would even call it nudity and absence of any kind of artistic addition. They didn't care about flourishes on letters. They didn't care about these pointy serifs. They didn't care about italics. They didn't care about stressed letter forms looking nice. What he wanted was directional signage. It had to be clear. It turns out it's very popular for corporate and transportation branding as well, and it's currently the best-selling Linotype typeface. Transport was designed for the UK Department of Transport for road signage. Part of the design criteria, they wanted very open counters and they wanted it letter spaced or everything spaced out very slightly, but still retain the word shape, all in the aim of making things very readable. They wanted to offset the effects of halation when viewed at decision-making distances, which I think is something like 300 meters or something like that, in full headlight glare. And we see an example here of halation. We see two examples of halation, where as you get that bright headlight on a sign and you get that reflection, you get that filling in of spaces around and within the letters. And you can see how the bottom one, you look at the lowercase e and the s, it becomes hard to even tell what that letter is with the halation. Even in the top one where you have halation, you still have the effect of it, but it's still readable. Only good for road signs? No. It was used exclusively for the website at gov.uk. That's what they use throughout their official website. And you can download the font for free if you want it from roads.org.uk at fonts. Pavement is a vertically stretched version of Transport Medium, and we've all seen examples of this where they put speed limits or cautions and things like that, where they paint it actually on the roadway, and you always see it at a distance at a very steep angle. And so by having that vertically stretched, it makes it much more readable. You can download Pavement for free if you want it from the UK. Bell Centennial It was designed for AT&T to replace Bell Gothic that had been used previously in phone books. So what were they looking for? They wanted to cram more phone numbers, more lines of text onto a given page, and they wanted it to be able to be readable at very small sizes as well as with poor quality paper. So more characters per line just meant that they had fewer pages to print. It was cheaper to print the phone books. And then the poor quality paper, they didn't want to spend a lot of money on the paper for phone books. So they wanted to use crappy paper where you get ink bleeding, and they wanted to reduce the effects of that ink bleeding on the paper. Here's an example of Bell Centennial at 160 point size. And you see all these weird little areas of the different glyphs. Those are called ink traps. And they're actually designed to allow, on poor quality paper, for the ink to spread into those areas, and then it still retains the overall shape of the letter more properly. Here's an example of a printed capital letter M on crappy paper using Bell Centennial, which had ink traps, and you can see how the ink is filled in those little areas, and it still kept the overall shape of the letter much better than if they didn't have the ink traps. Only useful tiny sizes, cheap paper? No. UK Mazda, they used it in huge signage, billboard size signage in the mid-1990s. The English National Opera advertised a production of one of their operas in 2010 using Bell Centennial. Kind of odd, I think, but I presume that they knew what they were doing. Retina was designed for the Wall Street Journal, specifically for their stock pages. In year 2000. The design criteria for that, they wanted very small sizes, so 5.5 type, so they could fit a lot of stocks on a single page. So they wanted to use ink traps, and they wanted equal width even if you had different weights. Normally, if you bold something, it'll get wider, and if you have heavy, it'll get wider still. They wanted the stock numbers to line up even if they were bolded or not bolded. They wanted all those numbers to line up. So this is what Retina looks like in 5 different weights. And you can see they're exactly the same width for all the 5 weights. So as you have stock listings, one above the other, if one of them is bolded, the numbers still line up. It was updated in 2016 for on-screen viewing to align with the pixel grid on LCD screens. So just an example of how typefaces do get updated periodically, depending on the criteria that is in place at the time. So cross purposes. So Times New Roman, designed for tight text and narrow columns. So does that mean I can't use it for body width or page width body text? Frutiger and Transport, designed for big signs. So does that mean I can't use them for subheads in a book? Well, of course you can. It's just good to be aware of why it was originally designed, how it was optimized, and that will help you to decide whether this is appropriate for your particular use or not. Retina was designed for columns of tiny numbers. So does that mean I can't use it for body text? Pavement was designed for road lettering, viewed at an angle. So does that mean I can't use it to caption an illustration? Well, they're probably not the best choices. Plus, Retina will set you back $900 US for the complete family of 72 fonts. So you're probably not going to go to that unless you actually really need the characteristics that it was optimized for. This is an example of a sign that got put on a corporate meeting room door. Please keep the door closed, thank you. And somebody came along and added, please don't use Comic Sans. We're a Fortune 500 company, not a lemonade stand. Comic Sans is one of those things that people either love or hate. So there's lots of jokes about it and opinions out on the internet. So this one off one site, every time you use Comic Sans, Faye will punch this adorable little bunny. You had Holly Combs, founder of band Comic Sans, saying use a Comic Sans is like turning up to a black tie event in a clown costume. You have jokes. Comic Sans walks into a bar. The bartender says, we don't serve your type. Well, Vincent Conner, who worked for Microsoft at the time, and he designed Comic Sans. And he said, if you love Comic Sans, you don't know much about typography. But he went on to say, if you hate it, you really don't know much about typography either, and you should get another hobby. This is all about appropriate uses for a particular typeface. So how did it come about? So back in 1995, out came Microsoft Bob, and it was a room metaphor for using your computer. So if you wanted to write a letter, you'd click here and it'd bring up a word processor. If you wanted to do your finances, you'd click here and it'd bring up a spreadsheet. If you wanted a calendar, you click there, and so forth. And being a new metaphor for using a computer, they had this little dog called Robo Retriever, which would guide you through the program. So it'd pop up and it would talk to you. And this was a precursor to Microsoft Clippy, which is another thing that everybody liked to hate. But at any rate, this Rover Retriever would pop up and help you periodically. And all of the text within those dialog boxes was in Times New Roman. Well, Vincent Conner, who was working at Microsoft at the time, and he saw some of the early builds of Microsoft Bob, and he came out and said, dogs don't talk in Times New Roman. So he set about to actually design Comic Sans as a replacement for Rover Retriever to use in Microsoft Bob. Now, we never got it into the product. The product was pretty short-lived anyways. It lived less than a year before Microsoft discontinued it. But after it got designed, Comic Sans got put into Windows, first as part of an extra pack, and then into the regular font list later on. And so that's the beginnings of Comic Sans. So if we look back at that quote saying, use the Comic Sans is like turning up to a black tie event in a clown costume, well, maybe using Times New Roman is like turning up at the circus in black tie. So again, Comic Sans is not necessarily a bad thing to use, it's just appropriate use of particular typeface. Comic Sans has been used in some really odd places on a defibrillator machine. Doesn't seem to really suit the seriousness of something like that. Somebody wrote a book for Pope Benedict and used Comic Sans for the entire book. After the George Floyd death, there was a lot of things coming out with the I Can't Breathe, and maybe that's a little bit too casual a typeface to use for that subject. Or this one, Surrey Police in the UK. If you've been the subject of a rape or serious sexual assault, would like to make a decision on what you can do, contact them. Again, probably a little bit too casual for that particular subject. And then you get the particle physics people at CERN, and they came out with an announcement that they were switching to Comic Sans for all their official channels of communication. Fortunately, that came out on April 1st, and they never did actually change to Comic Sans. Okay, let's look at some other display typefaces. These tend to be big and bold. So Goody Stout is an example of it, and display typefaces tend to be really big in your face. However, in body text, you have differences and the effects are going to still be there, just a little bit more subtle. If you look at the top one and versus the bottom one looks to be a little bit more formal. The top one, a little bit more relaxed. And if you look at some of the individual glyphs, you can see where those are coming from. So the T, it's a little bit, you have a little bit of an angled slice at the top of the T, a little bit change in the weight of the strokes. The P, you see there's a little bit of curvature to the upright on it. The O is shaped a little differently. The M in Candera has got splayed uprights on that. Just a little bit of a more casual feel to the typeface. Not a dramatic sort of thing that you pick out really, really easily, but it will affect the flavor of the reading of that text. Let's look at some other examples of where you might want to choose one typeface over another. Say you have a magazine called Canadian Finance. Would you think that the title for that magazine would be better in Castellar or Verdana? I think most people would think that the Castellar, it looks a little bit more appropriate for that particular use. Neither is wrong or right, but just maybe one is better than the other for that particular use. Or if you have a furniture store called Colonial Furniture, would you want to put your signage in Chiller or Old English? Like most people, colonial furniture, Old English seems to suit it a lot better. Sally's lemonade stand, something that you want to have a very casual feel for it. So maybe Andy would be more appropriate than Impact. Or, lava lamp shop. Just the top one, Retrophile, has that feeling of a head shop, sort of thing. And maybe it's more appropriate for that particular usage. Poetry Tea House, something that is a little bit more elegant. Lucida handwriting over top of something that's more formal, Note au Sens. Or this one here. This one here is an interesting one. Foothills Bar and Grill. So if you had a business and it was Foothills Bar and Grill, which signage would you choose between those two? I would go so far as to say that if you're trying to attract a clientele that is in their 20s and 30s, maybe Magneto would be more appropriate. If you're trying to attract, clientele that's in their 50s and 60s, maybe Western would be more appropriate. Again, think about the usage, think about the people who are going to be reading your text. How are they going to react to the particular choices you make? If we look at a stop sign, everybody's seen them millions of times, and you see it with the stop word in Garamond. Just doesn't look quite right. Forte is even worse. Penna, okay, that's looking okay, but it's awfully thin. Or you get to Century Gothic, and now that's looking more like a stop sign. Or to take it one step further, Highway Gothic. And the name gives it away. This was somebody who designed a typeface specifically for road signage. And that is the typeface that is used throughout most of North America for road signage, is Highway Gothic. It just is in your face. There's no question that you can read it easily at a great distance. You can make out individual glyphs very easily. Again, that sort of nakedness to the particular typeface. No elegance to it. You don't want elegance. You want that people can make out the sign right off the bat. Word marks are a place people can have a lot of fun with typefaces. So Good Foods, they actually use fruit for the vowels. Kind of a neat sort of substitution in there. Sofa World, now this is my interpretation on it, but I think they use Futura Black for the word sofa, and they use Garamond Italic for the word world. And to me, that sort of conveys the idea of sturdy but comfortable. I think that's pretty cool. Intact Insurance, they use Bodoni, which is impacts certain elegance to it. It has things like, a ball terminal on the C. It has an elegant, top part of the T, very large dot on the I, and then they protect it with heavy square brackets. So elegant protection gives a really nice feeling for an insurance company. Going is a web app that you can use or a phone app you can use to get cheap flights. And so by making the G into an arrow, it evokes a feeling of movement or travel. Tour de France, which is a cycling race that is given every year. And if you look at the OUR and the blot beside it, it depicts a bicycle. Kind of a neat way to incorporate the whole idea behind the Tour de France right into its phrasing. This one I thought was brilliant. Made for Med is a website that is actually for doctors. It's not for the lay people, and it's all about modernizing family medicine. So their logo, they actually embrace that stereotype of doctors' writing being illegible. I thought that was brilliant. Zara is a clothing retailer, and this used to be their word mark. And then they redid it. They did it in a linotype, did up Pro Bold, and they tightened it up. They have very heavy stressing on the lettering, very dramatic differences in the stroke weights for different parts of the glyph. And then they tightened it up even more. So they tightened up the letter spacing, they thinned the strokes, brought the A to a point above the cap height, opened up the counters, all kinds of things like that. And this was very polarizing. And some people said, new Xera logo has been kerned into oblivion. Eric Speakerman, the gentleman who talked about being addicted to typography, said it was the worst piece of type I've seen in years. Was this done by one of those new robots that would replace humans? So a lot of people were not really happy with that new word mark. And some wag came along and said, well, this was the word mark in 2011. This is the word mark in 2019. And they figure in 2027 it's going to look like this. The Metropolitan Museum of Art, from a distance, very simple logo. It just looks like an M on a black solid circle. As you move in closer, you start to see more elegant things about it. You see it, the circle within the squares, you see the diagonals and the 6 smaller circles. Very elegant logo. Then they redid it, and this is their new logo. And Justin Davidson, a designer, said the new logo is typographical bus crash. And Andrew Pekulik, who's an overall designer, just said, why did you do this? So a lot of these can be very polarizing. IBM, maybe this is how you redesign typeface or logos in a way that it's done right. So this was their logo in 1947. 1956, they updated it. Not dramatically differences in it. The counters on the B, they've gone to squares rather than the D shape in the of the counters in the Benton bold. Not dramatic differences, but just a little bit of an update to it. They did a fairly significant one where the typeface itself didn't change an awful lot from the 1956 logo. They just gave those horizontal stripes to it. And then they updated it to make it fewer horizontal stripes in 1972, and that's their current logo. So they've had the same logo since 1972. The URL at the bottom talks in length about how IBM went about making those changes. It's quite an interesting read. Walmart, maybe this is another one redesigned done wrong. This is right from their website. They were excited to announce a comprehensive brand refresh, and it demonstrated evolving capabilities that reflect enduring commitment to serving customers, build credibility connections, a more modern, culturally dynamic brand. This is the old Walmart logo. This is the new Walmart logo. And somebody on Reddit said, so you selected the text and hit Control B? Now, it wasn't quite as simple as that, but a very, very minor update. I have no objection to them wanting to update their logo, but they shouldn't make a big deal about it, saying that, modern, culturally dynamic, and all the rest of it. This, I don't think, reflected it. And not many people out there seem to think that the Walmart brand update was notable. Jeopardy, this is something I came up with. I've been bothered by years by the fact that Jeopardy has everything in uppercase letters. And I always wondered why, because I know that mixed case lettering is easier to read. So I asked at Perplexity AI, I said, typographically speaking, is the typeface used on Jeopardy a poor choice? And it came back and it said that it was chosen for legibility on small early TV screens. So, okay, all of a sudden, maybe it makes more sense what they chose at that time, that it would have been harder to read if they had used mixed case and things like that. So the critics argue it's less readable compared to modern fonts, but maybe they didn't change it because they wanted to be traditional brand consistency. They didn't want to alienate their audience by going and messing around with the fonts that were used. And so they've stuck with that. I still think that they should actually go to a mixed case, but they haven't chosen to do so yet. If you're writing text, often you'll get into headings and subheadings and body text. So you want to make sure if you do have headings and subheadings that they do stand out, different weights, different size, placement, color, so forth. If you're going to pair fonts, avoid pairing typefaces that are too similar. Again, you have your headings and your subheadings stand out from the body text and people not be confused about what's a subhead and what's body text. So especially if you're using both serif and sans serif for both the headings and subheadings as well as body text, you don't want to have them too similar. And use them sparingly, different ones 2 is probably your best bet. Let's take a look at some examples of how you could make headings stand out, or in this case, subheads, stand out from your body text. In this case here, we have the same typeface, we just used a heavier weight. Here we used a different typeface. So we used for the subheadings, we used a sans serif, and for the body text, we used a serif font. And they're both the same typeface size, 14 point, but the headings stand out because of that. Here we used different typeface, same size and a different color. And the different color certainly makes your subhead stand out. Here we used really dramatic, where we have different typeface, larger size, outdented, and colored for the subheads. And that really makes them stand out. All of those can work, and lots more. So just make sure that somehow you make sure that your subheadings are standing out from your body text. Some typography rules that you should be aware of. No spaces after or before hyphens. So if it's 2019-2020, you do it without the spaces. A hyphen is used to join words. So something like up-to-date antivirus, rock hard candy, ex-wife. End dashes are a little bit wider than a hyphen, and it's used to separate a range. So if you can replace the hyphen or the end dash with the word through, that is when you would actually use an end dash. So the 2019 through 2020 fiscal year. You can get that with the Alt and numeric keypad on Windows computer. So Alt 0150 will give you an end dash. And in Microsoft Word and LibreOffice Writer, it will actually do an autocorrect. So if you actually type in a word, space, the dash, space, and a word, it'll actually autocorrect that, but it leaves the spaces in. You should go in and remove those extra spaces afterwards. An M dash is even longer, and it's a break in a sentence. So if you could replace it with comma or parentheses, that's when you would use an M dash. So something like the fee increase opposed by all went ahead. You can get that from the numeric keypad, or in Microsoft Word or LibreOffice Writer, this is an autocorrect that is done right. So if you do a word dash dash and another word, it'll automatically correct that to use the M dash, and it will have no spaces on it. Indents and line spacing. So first line indents and spaces between paragraphs have the same relationship as belts and suspenders. You only need one of them. Don't use both. So you can see here in the top example, we have extra spacing between the paragraphs. The next one down is the middle one, is no spacing, extra spacing between paragraphs, but we use first line indents. That's quite regularly used in books and things like that. But you don't use both, where you do indents as well as extra spacing. Justified versus ragged right. So ragged right at the top, where the right hand, or sorry, the justified at the top, where you use every line ends at the same distance. The general consensus on it, that can be very nice, but most word processors can't do a good job of doing the word spacing and letter spacing to get that to look proper. And so Microsoft Word certainly can't do really good justified text. So you're better off in most word processors, just leave it as a ragged right. One space after a period. If you go back probably 100 years or more, there was often 6 or 7 spaces after a period. And then it sort of settled on the idea of 2 spaces after a period. That's a typewriter holdover, and really all you need now is 1 space after a period. If you're using foot and inch markers, watch out for this, because Microsoft Word will actually, and LibreOffice Writer, will autocorrect those by default, so that when you type them in, it'll correct them to the smart quotes. And that's wrong if you're using the foot and inch markers. The proper one is to use the prime, which is, it's not quite vertical, it's actually tilted a little bit up to the right. That's the right way of doing it with the prime and double prime. But if you just do uprights, it's usually considered to be acceptable. And if you are in Microsoft Word or LibreOffice Writer, the easiest way to get around the autocorrect is as soon as it changes it to that smart quote, immediately hit Control Z. It will just undo that autocorrect and it'll leave you with the straight uprights. Multiplication symbol, strictly speaking, don't use the letter X. You can see in this example here, it actually follows the shape of the typeface design, the X. So in this case here, you can see that it's got a little bit of an elegance to it. It's not just two crossed lines. So you should use Unicode 00D7, which is a true multiplication symbol. You can get that in Word, or different word processors have different ways you can insert Unicode characters into it. The division, there is actually a proper division symbol in the Unicode, but the keyboard / character is close enough that you can just get away with that. There are a lot of math symbols that are available in Cambria Math in the Unicode characters. Copying and pasting. If you look at this line of text, and you might be able to pick out that there's something a little bit odd there. This is what it is the words something odd. If we look at the X height line across the blue, the X height of the red text is a little bit lower. If you start looking at the shapes of the letters, you can see that there's considerable differences in the shapes of the letters. You can see a wider aperture on the red E rather than the blue E. If you look at the G, the lowercase g, one of them is a 2-story and one of them is a 1-story, completely different shape to those particular glyphs. And that's because the blue text is Arial 11 point and the red text is Cambria 11 point. This can happen when you're copying and pasting information between a couple of documents or from the web into a document and so forth. So whenever you're copying and pasting, you're best to make sure that you don't copy over the formatting of that text, which will happen by default. You'll get the typeface, the size, the style, the color, all of that will come across unless you do a paste special and do it as unformatted text, where it'll pick up the all of the characteristics of the text that is around where you're inserting it. So be careful on that. When you end up with something that is quite similar, you might not even notice that you have a different font installed there in that text, and it'll just bother the readers. What if you're missing a font? So say you choose a particular typeface that you want to have in a document, you give the document to somebody else and they don't have that typeface installed, and they bring the document up and then they print it or they continue editing or whatever they have to do with it. The result is going to be a font substitute. They don't have the font on their computer, so rather than just leaving blanks, the computer will substitute another font. It may be completely random what it chooses as the default for the font. So the solution for that is to embed fonts in the document if you can. I'm not a lawyer. There are licensing issues, things like that come into play, and I'll talk a little bit about ramifications there, but really what you have to do is just be careful when you're embedding fonts. Here's an example of it where I had the font Cotton Candies was installed on a computer, and I do up this announcement, it's party time. I give this document to somebody who didn't have the font Cotton Candies installed, and this is what they got. So completely different. Notice that Microsoft Word still identified the text as being in Cotton Candies, but how often do you actually even glance up at that dialog box to see what font is being used? And in this case, it used Calibri as a substitute. I don't know if that's just a universal thing or what, but it's going to have to substitute something else that's on your computer. If you want to embed a font into a document, in Microsoft Office, you go to File Options, and in the Save dialog box section, you have a checkbox for Embed Fonts in the file. And so you can go ahead and choose that. You may or may not have a problem doing that. In LibreOffice Writer, you go to File Properties Font tab, and you have the same option to embed fonts in the document. Occasionally you might run into this where built into the font file itself, there's a license restriction that says that it cannot be embedded into a document. This one in particular I thought was kind of interesting because Snowy Christmas was actually a free font at dafont.com. So I don't know why they built in a license restriction on a free font. If we look at anatomy of a newsletter, so we see a lot of different characteristics about fonts and how they're used in practical use. So for our newsletter, for our headings, we use Calibri, and for our body text, we use Cambria. For columns, we have it either 2 columns, where it's either 1/3, 2/3 split, or an even split, or we have 3 columns evenly split, depending on the content that is going on to that particular page. The justification is ragged right, because as I said, Word cannot do proper right justification and have the text look proper. For our logo, for the word Ottawa, we use Perpetua titling MT bold italic, and for PC News, we use Perpetua titling MT bold. Some of the enhancements we have: article headings are white text on blue bar. We have article leads, a 3-line drop cap. For our subheadings, we use bolded, the same body text, but we just bold it. On page 1, we have an index where we have, actually in this case is blue text on a lighter blue background. And at the bottom of page 1, we always have next meeting in black on blue. By having it very consistent in the way that we handle our typefaces, our how we use them, our layouts and things like that, people get used to our newsletter, and it's much easier for them to read in the future. They always know what to expect in the layout. So the most widely used font in the world is Calibri. And it was designed in 2002 by Luc de Groot at Microsoft. And in 2007, it became the default for Word, replacing that Times New Roman so that it will no longer be the most common typeface around. And it replaced Arial in Outlook, PowerPoint, and Excel. And Simon Garfield said, but did this make this the best font, the most versatile, most seductive, surprising, and beautiful? And he said, of course not. That font is yet to come. So some of the extras that I have in the PDF file, and I do have a bunch of time, so I probably get time to go through this if I want, if you want, if you're not too many questions or that. But I have all kinds of resources, web resources. I have where you can download font designing software, so you can create your own fonts. I have books that I've read, all kinds of different resources if you want to get more into the weeds with typefaces. How to examine fonts before you install them on your computer, and how to look at the characteristics of those particular fonts. How to uninstall or install fonts on your computer and Windows computer. Talking about obliques versus fake obliques and what the differences are and why you might care. Ligatures, which is a way of combining 2 characters together into a single glyph. Things like the Encyclopedia Britannica, they use a ligature for the AE, and they can add a certain elegance to your documents. I'll talk more in there about OpenType stylistic sets and how OpenType fonts can have different, almost completely separate fonts available in the single font file, and how to find them and use them. Going beyond Calibri as the default, Microsoft did change from Calibri as being the default font in Microsoft Office to Aptos. And so I talk a little there about they actually commissioned 5 different fonts, and then they chose one of those fonts. All of them are actually available now. And then I have a bunch of other odds and sods in the extra slides in the PDF file. Just a couple of words about the Ottawa PC User Group, and then I'll throw it open to questions. So just our standard advertising. Our motto is users helping users. We have Zoom meetings. They're open to members, non-members alike. We do it all over Zoom now. So anybody can join any number of times. We don't restrict the number of times you can come as a guest. Our main monthly meeting is the second Wednesday of the month, and that's where we'll have in a particular speaker on a particular topic. And then other Wednesday evenings, we have quick weekly Q&A sessions where people can just ask anything they want, share information. We have, if you want to know, oh, how do I do this in Excel? Maybe somebody there will be able to help you out or whatever. If you just go to the bottom of our homepage, it has all of the upcoming meetings. If you do want to join the OPCUG, it's $20 a year. That's Canadian. And I meant to take off that Ottawa Public Library presentation schedule. That's really only relevant to people in Ottawa because they're in-person meetings. As I say, our meetings are open, and most of our abilities or features and that in the user group are available to anybody, but there are two services that are available only to members, 24/7 discussion forum, as well as we have one-on-one remote assistance where if you have a particular problem, we can pair you up with some volunteer who thinks they might be able to help you out, and they can connect to your computer over Zoom or Microsoft Quick Assist, and then you can work together on the problem, and they can see your screen, and optionally you can give them control of your keyboard and mouse, and you can work together to solve the problem. And so with that, that's the end of the formal part of the presentation. So I'd like to throw it open to any questions. And if you want, I can go into some of the additional material that is in the PDF. So I will at this point stop the share. And are there any questions?
Would you like to speak to Inquisitive Mary Frances for a minute?
Sure.
I'm trying to make a joke.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
How many spaces do you use after a period?
I use one.
Okay.
I have for years.
One is right.
I was curious about the word SODS that I saw there at the last. I didn't quite get the drift of what that word meant.
I'm not sure what you were talking about, so I'll go back to the share.
SODS, I believe, right toward the end where it was talking about different SODS.
Tell me when I get odds and sods. Sorry, yeah, the odds and sods.
Odds and sods.
Yeah.
I didn't quite.
Sorry.
What are you trying to tell me?
Yeah, I guess that's just an idiomatic expression. It's just a bunch of different things, just small, curious things. I can show you one thing as an example. I'll just jump to it as one of the odds and sods that I have. It's just curious. Oh, sorry, I just went and jumped right past it. Let me go back to the share. Let me do the share screen. And if I just go right to the bottom. So this is what I mean by an odd and sod. So just a typographical train wreck. So this was a thing I came across that I thought was bizarre. It's a website for vengeance vans. So there's this van that can go around, you can hire them, and then you can wreck stuff inside the van. And so you can smash things up. And the entire website used the font that you see on the screen. The entire website. I thought that was so bizarre. And they actually have changed it. So if you go to them now, you'll see what is in the bottom right. So they actually changed it to Van Rot Destroy for the main titles and then Cabin for body text. But I thought that was just an oddity. It's just, these odds and sides are just, here's another odd and sod. White on black looks heavier than black on white. It's something that most people, you don't really care about it. But if you are typesetting things, it's good to know that white on black looks heavier than white on black. That's what I mean by odds and sods. It's just curiosities and things like that.
As you went through the process, I had a mini reaction when you showed us Walmart of old and Walmart as it is currently. The current one really relaxes me, makes me smile, appeals to me, and I got no reaction from the old one. It was
really? That's interesting.
It was stark.
Yeah, I mean, fonts are very, very particular to each individual, and that's part of the problem with choosing fonts when you have a project that requires you to choose some typography, is how are people going to react to it? And it is far from universal. And so you can have things that have cultural significance that come into play that you may not be aware of and so forth. So it can get really tricky trying to come up with something that other people are going to be reading, and how are they going to react to it? How easily are they going to be able to read it? What are they going to feel when they're reading it? So I find that's interesting because well, the Walmart one is actually very new. I mean, that's just in the last couple of months that they came up with that new logo. But most people react to it saying that, what? It's changed? But it's interesting that you actually have a different feeling for it. That's interesting.
Well, I think this was very interesting. You're the only person I ever sat and listened to talk on this subject. So I just I just really enjoyed myself.
Oh, thank you. You know, I think it's kind of funny because when I give this at the Ottawa Public Library and people sign up for it and they come out, they're interested in the topic or they wouldn't have signed up. But when I give them a presentation like this, where it's just, it's a monthly meeting or whatever, and people just show up because they don't necessarily care about the topic, but they just, oh, it's the monthly meeting, so I'll go it anyways. And almost universally, I've had people say that they thought it was going to be really boring. And it turned out that they said, wow, that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I was surprised by how engaging it was and how it kept my attention a lot more than I thought it would be able to. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. Yeah,
Good stuff.
yeah.
Any
Thank
other
you.
questions?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Do you want me to go? Like, I was scheduled for 90 minutes. If you got other things to do, that's fine. If you want, I could spend 15 minutes going through some of those extra slides. I see
I,
one nod.
I think we should go for it.
Yeah,
Okay,
let's do it.
let's do it. Okay, go back to the share. And I'll go through them. I'll fly through. As you can see, like a huge number of them are only in the downloadable file as it stands now. So there's 91 out of I've showed 91 out of 134 slides. So there's lots in the downloadable. So some of the resources that are listed in the PDF file, some books. This one I found really nice, just my type. It was really kind of interesting. This one here is, I say everybody should pick this up because you can get it for free online. So find out how type works, stop stealing sheep. It's interesting because the way the title came about was Frederick Gowdy, who is a type designer. He was being given an award and they gave him a certificate and it was in black letter. And the person who had designed that one, they had actually letter spaced it, so they had stretched out the letters a little bit, and that's something you don't do with black letter. And so Frederick Gowdy said, anyone who would letter space black letter would steal sheep. So Eric Speakerman is a type designer. He said, stop stealing sheep and find out how type really works. It's a really interesting book, and so I highly recommend people pick that up because it is now available for free. It was just in the last year or so became available for free. If you want to delve into all of the different typefaces and what is the difference between various ones and why do they design it certain ways, this is a really good book, The Anatomy of Type. It talks about all the characteristics of type. This one I found it interesting, but it's really more it's a reference work. It's a textbook more than anything else, really. If you want to get into talking about what is the different characteristics of the subcategories of typefaces and subcategories and so forth, this one explains it very well. This one I found to be quite readable book as well, Type Primer. The only typeface that's been made into a full-length movie, Helvetica the movie, and it's kind of interesting. I've seen the whole film. You can watch the trailer of it at the URL that's on the screen. Microsoft has tons of information about typography. They have the Windows font list for Windows 10 and 11, including, in a lot of cases, what the design criteria was for each of those fonts and what they recommend them being used for, and some pairing hints and things like that. If you want to get into the legal stuff about whether you can redistribute fonts from Microsoft's point of view, they have information on that. Some websites. I love Typography, has tons of articles about typography. Thinking About Type is another really good one. Typepedia, I really like. Details on a lot of different typefaces in there and really talking about the subtle differences that sometimes occur. Digital Design and Media Production has a lot of good stuff. Learning Hub, Visme. More resources, myfont.com. If you're into monotype fonts, and they're one of the biggest type foundries in the world, everything you want to know about any of their fonts, the information is there. If you wanted to identify a font, so you're out and about and you see a sign and you say, oh, I wonder what font that was. Take a picture of it with your phone, and then you can go to either what the font or what font is. And the what the font has actually an Android or an iOS app. You can also go to it by their website, and what font is, I think, is just a website. And so you paste in the picture, and then it will try to identify the actual font that was used. Some other resources, yeah, just some very general stuff there. Pairing of typefaces. Type.io has really good website on how to combine multiple typefaces on a single document. FontJoin, Canva, and Dribbble are ones that are not as good, I find, as Type.io in terms of giving you good guidance on pairing of typefaces. If you want to get into page design rather than just type design, there's a couple of sites there that give you a lot of hints on doing attractive page layouts. Free fonts. Google Fonts has over 1,000 free open source typefaces. And one of the cool things about that is if you're a web designer, you can actually embed the font in the website. And even if the person who visits your website doesn't have the font installed on their computer, it will still end up displaying correctly on your website. Dafont.com has over 58,000 typefaces. There are a lot of them aren't free, but I would say probably over half of them are free, at least for personal use. I find a bit mixed quality. There's some really, really excellent quality fonts. There's some that are a little bit dubious on their quality. If you wanted to create or edit fonts, free and open source software, the top three are available, and then free but not open source, there's a bunch at the bottom. And the Microsoft Font Maker handwritten is really kind of cool. And so if you go for that, you can actually, they'll give you a page of each, a spot where you can write in each of the letters of the alphabet and the numbers and so forth. Then you scan it, and they will actually make a font from your handwriting. How to examine fonts? You can just double click the TTF for TrueType font or OpenTypeface OTF font, and then it'll bring up this quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog and the numbers in different sizes, and you can see what they look like before you bother to install them. You could also go into any of the fonts that are already installed on your Windows computer. You can go to Settings, Personalization, Fonts, and then you can click on the details for each of the fonts, and you'll see samples of the particular text in that font. Examining Fonts Character Map is an application that comes with Windows, and it allows you to see all the installed fonts and all of the glyphs that are available in that particular font. And it allows you to find odd sort of characters like the interrobang, and so you can use that in your writing. How to install fonts. Right-click on the font file. If you select Install, it'll install just for you, or you can install for all users, and then you can, and any other accounts on your computer will be able to use the font as well. Or you can just drag and drop the font into Windows Fonts folder to be available for all, or drop on Settings, Personalization, Fonts, Add Fonts is another way of getting it. Uninstalling fonts, basically you just go to the font dialog box, choose the uninstall. Fake versus, or oblique versus fake oblique. Some typefaces you'll see, like in here, Century, it says there's one font face. So if you do a bold, it's Windows that's doing the bolding rather than the type designer. On the other hand, if you look at Century Gothic, it has 4 font faces. And in that case, what we have is actually 4 typefaces that were designed by the type designer, including the italic was designed by the design type. In Sentry, if you do an italic, it'll show up as italic, but that's a fake italic because that's just Microsoft Word or whatever skewing the thing over with no hinting, no subtle differences that the type designer might have designed into the typeface. Ligatures is when you have certain letters like F and I where they get that awkward crash between the two letters, and ligatures will overcome that. So it combines them into a single glyph. So it might look more elegant. So the TH, you see it as a ligature, it just looks more elegant. These ones I thought were kind of funny because when I saw this one here, I thought this was an accented character, some European language or something like that, that was accented with these two dots. Well, no, it's not. It's actually a ligature of I and J together.
Oh, okay.
And there's another example like the encyclopedia and things like that. And this one here too. I never knew before getting into typography that that is actually OE as a ligature rather than a CE or something like that. So that's a ligature of O and E put together. So Encyclopedia Britannica uses it for the A and the E. Ligatures and tracking, this can get important. If you have no ligature, normal tracking, this is the word think. Okay, so that's fine. This is also fine. A ligature with normal tracking. So they put together the T and the H into a single glyph. That's fine. If you expand the tracking, it spreads out all the letters, but if you have a ligature, that is the T and the H are a single glyph. It can't actually spread those apart. And so you end up with really weird effects if you start expanding the tracking and you've got ligatures. Now, if you have no ligature and expanded tracking, there it actually looks fine. So avoid ligatures if the tracking is changing. Now, OpenType fonts can support the composition and decomposition of ligatures automatically. As you expand tracking, it'll break them into the separate characters for you, and you don't have to worry about that third example here, where you end up with spaced out everywhere else except with the ligature. OpenType stylistic sets. So this is Gabriola. And Gabriola has different stylistic sets built into the single typeface. If you just bring up Gabriola and start typing, this is what you'll get. But you can go into the font dialog box and you can actually choose a different stylistic set right up to, this as what you're typing as opposed to this as the default. A lot of typefaces that are built into Windows actually have stylistic sets built into them where you can go in and choose those different looks to the font. To get that, you go to the font dialog box, you go to the advanced tab, and there will be a stylistic set, and they're just numbers 1 through 7. They never name them or anything like that. So you just have to try them and see what they actually look like. Impact has a number of different stylistic sets, and you can see that, boy, they're really different look and feel to things. This is what you'll get with Impact by default. But if you want, you select stylistic set 1, then you have things like an L and O, they'll overlap completely. Or you have an E with a bar underneath it if you use stylistic set 2. Montserrat is so different that I'm surprised that they actually built it as a stylistic set. To me, it looks like a completely different typeface. But that's Montserrat in stylistic set 1. Arial has a very strange stylistic set number 2. So here I put in the same characters, capital A, lowercase a, capital B, lowercase b, so forth throughout the whole thing. Then I just changed the stylistic set, and look at what happened. The uppercase and lowercase a are identical and look like the lowercase a. On the other hand, the B, both of them look like they are uppercase B's, even though that's an uppercase B and a lowercase b. Very, very odd in the Arial style set. I don't know if that was by mistake or what, but try it. It's the way it is. Common Sans actually has different stylistic sets built into it. So what you could do on something like that is if you have, say, a signage or something like that, and you have a bunch of lowercase letter A's, they don't all have to look the same. You could have it where you choose particular characters and say, okay, for that A, I'm going to use the default. For this A, I'm actually going to go in and choose stylistic set 2, and then I will have a different letter A at that particular point on the sign or whatever. Or I can go to a 2-story A by using stylistic set 2. So you can mix and match and make it look like it's not a font where people just look and say, well, every one of the A's is identical, so this is obviously not a hand-lettered sign. Well, if you do this, they might think that this is actually a hand-lettered sign because not all of the letters look the same. This was going into when Microsoft was looking for a new default font. So they commissioned 5 different fonts. I'll just flash through them. Tenorite was one of them. Bierstadt, Aptos. So this came out as Bierstadt when they had the original competition. It became Aptos, which is now the default font in Microsoft Office applications. Skeena, which I find is quite an elegant, nice, little bit relaxed typeface. Seaford, I find very attractive typeface as well. Grandview, I don't really like this, and I realized afterwards, derived from the classic German road and railway signage. That's why I don't like it. It's so formal and rigid. So Calibri versus Aptos. So the last default font going into what is now the default font in Microsoft Office, talking about some of the characteristics that are different. Here's looking at some letters in it, and you can see how Calibri was a little bit softer, more rounded. Aptos is a little bit more formal, sharp. Yeah, narrower apertures in Aptos. Some people have actually told me that they noticed when the default font changed to Aptos, and I was surprised because most people don't actually notice subtle differences like this, but it is different. You can always go and change back to Calibri if that's what you really like. Okay, here's some other odds and sods. So a large typeface family. So this is interesting. This is Barlow. You can get it for free at GitHub. And it actually is a huge number of font files. I think it's 54 different weights, slants, and widths on it. So you can really be particular on exactly how things look by choosing the appropriate characteristics. There's that thing of white on black looking heavier than black on white. This Sitka was an interesting family of fonts, and it was actually designed by computer, like very specific things where they optimized it for different sizes. So every one of the different sizes is subtly different, and it's made for readability at different sizes. So if you put in Sitka and you choose a font size that is, say, 9 point, you will get Sitka small. If you choose to have it at 18.4, or say 20 point, you will actually get Sitka heading automatically. And it is subtly different in the glyph shapes between all of those 6 different font files. So kind of interesting. And the article URL at the bottom talks a little bit about how they went about designing it and why they did it and how they made it different and things like that. Rags, if you have non-justified text, the rags are those irregular shapes on the right-hand side. Ideally, you don't want to have rags to be a regular shape. You want to have them as a very irregular shape. Real designers, and especially when you get into just a poster or something like that, where it's a one-page thing, type designers will go to a huge amount of effort to make sure that little things like this actually are done correctly. So they will not have rags that have a regular shape like you see on the left. They will actually reword the copy text in order to make sure that they don't have those regular shapes in their rags. And then the typographical train wreck that I talked about. And then that's through all of the slides. So I will go ahead, stop the share. And again, if there are any questions at all, I'd be happy to entertain them.
All right, Chris, thank you very much for the very informative and interesting presentation. We really appreciate you being here. It's definitely a valuable resource for us to have the Speakers Guild, and including yourself, available for our program meetings. So thank you.
My
Uh,
pleasure.
Yay.
Yep, everyone, please tune back in on May 18th for our next program meeting with yours truly. I haven't chosen a topic yet, so if you have something in mind.
When?
May 18th? What, is that Father's Day, Mother's Day? All right, so it'll be some other day in May. You'll get an email. Let me know, reach out to me directly if anyone has an idea for a topic for May. Maybe.
Dates are always on the calendar.
Yep. All right.
Okay, I'm gonna go, folks. So thanks much. You got my email address. If you have any questions or anything like that, feel free to reach out.
Thanks so much, Chris.
I
Okay,
appreciate you.
bye-bye.
Yep, take care. All right, Everett, I think we can stop recording and get to the gambling / raffle portion of the meeting.